Welcome to IndoctriNation, a weekly conversation series about protecting yourself from systems of control. I'm your host, Rachel Bernstein.
Have you ever found yourself trapped in a situation you couldn't seem to escape? In this video lecture, Why Did I Stay?, I explore the complex psychology behind staying in systems of control. As a therapist and cult specialist, I reveal a profound truth. People don't stay in abusive relationships because they want to. They stay because they're conditioned to, or they're too afraid to leave. This lecture delves deep into the psychology traps that make leaving so difficult, whether it affects your clients, your friends, or if this is even for yourself. If you've ever questioned, why did I stay, or questioned other people in that same way, why did you stay? This comprehensive exploration of manipulation will help you understand the invisible chains that keep people bound to controlling systems. This lecture and many more are available for purchase on my website, rachelbernsteintherapy.com. Just follow the link in the description of this episode to view and purchase all of the available lecture videos. Take good care. Hello, everyone. Today on the show, I am so pleased to have Pamela Nickel Williams back on the show. She was born into Scientology, and her parents were early Scientologists who worked closely with L. Ron Hubbard at the First Church of Scientology in the late 1950s and were practicing members of the church until the late 1970s. After years of bearing her childhood memories, Pamela began writing and documenting her experiences, seeking to acknowledge the abuse she suffered and to try to understand the dysfunction that existed within her family due to Scientology's beliefs and their practices. Her soon-to-be-released memoir, Clearly Lies Are True, I love that title, is a powerful and compelling first-hand narrative account of her experiences as a child during the early inception of Scientology, a very interesting, trippy time. As both a cult survivor and a survivor of sexual abuse, her book chronicles her parents' search for total freedom, quote unquote, her sexual abuse at the hands of her father, and her mother's psychosis, which was brought about by Scientology. Pamela is now an accomplished educator who has taught in the public education system, the private sector, and in higher education. It is always lovely to talk to her. Here is Pamela now. It is a total treat to have Pam with me again. And today you're going to be speaking about the process of putting together a book and having it come out and what it feels like, I think, probably to narrow down what you want to write, because there's a whole lifetime of events that could be written about. And it's hard to make those kinds of decisions, but it's still so important to get out what you get out, and just the process of putting it out there for people to be able to read and learn from. So it is so nice to see you again. How you been?
Hi, Rachel. So great to be here again. I so appreciate you having me on IndoctriNation podcast and allowing me to talk some more about my book. So I'm in a very different place than last time we spoke. The book is out. That's been quite a journey. I've learned so much along the way. So I think that's one of the things I'd like to talk about is just I've learned so much about myself, about the process, and just some of the really great connections that I've made in the ex-Scientology community, which has surprised me. It's been a gift I didn't think that I would get through this whole process. So that's something that's just been wonderful that I've really embraced.
Really, really nice. There are a couple things that I was thinking about in preparation for our conversation today. I was thinking about the process of other people I've talked to who were in the process of writing a book or had come out with a book. And there was a great amount of concern about how it would impact the people in the stories, because there can be a feeling of having your conscience impacted by that, and a worry about putting people's names out there or just certain events that people would be able to recognize. And also what kind of response you're going to get, because there is the concern about people being adherents to a particular organization and being upset with you for somehow defaming it, as though you telling your story is defaming something in a larger sense or wreaking havoc in some greater way, even though you have every right to tell your story. It's reminding me of something Anne Lamott had said, where she said that sometimes people are upset about being named by her in a negative way. And her response is, well, if you didn't want me to talk about what you did that was wrong, then maybe you shouldn't have done it. Take it off of me. I can tell my story. And maybe this is really more for you to take responsibility and to notice that people might say what you did to them. It's also, though, sometimes this lovely and wonderful surprise, and people are often pleasantly surprised by hearing from people who say thank you, or that was my experience too, or you put something into words that I haven't, or I haven't felt either courageous enough or in a place to be able to put that out there. And so thank you very much. Responses can be all over the place. I'm just happy to hear that so far you've received some things that have really felt gratifying and reassuring to you, it sounds like.
Thank you, Rachel. That is one of my favorite Anne Lamott quotes. I am a huge fan of Anne Lamott. Because of Anne Lamott, I wrote a book. About 5 years ago, when I first started writing, a family member gave me for Christmas, they knew that I had started writing, and gave me for Christmas the book Bird by Bird. That's her book on writing. It helped me so immensely. I really wasn't familiar with Anne Lamott prior to that. And so I've read everything she ever wrote now after that book. But the best piece of advice that she gave in that, definitely that quote, is the permission to not have to get it all done at one time. Because as a cult survivor, as a ex-perfectionist, kind of not, but yes, trying, I was trained to do things well and to do them to completion. And, I'm an educator. And so that was really hard for me because I thought I had to just get it all out and I had to be done with it in a week or a month. And that gave me permission to write just a picture frame's worth, are Anne Lamott's words in her book, just a picture frame's worth. And so I actually picked up a 4x6 picture frame, in my house. And I thought, okay, how much writing is that? And it's like about the size of an index card. And she talks about that also. So I thought, oh, that's very doable. I can write more than that. That helped me immensely with the process of getting it out. That was the first step of the process. And then the next step is reconciling with what you're writing, reconciling with that. These are your memories. These are real. These did happen to you, especially when you've buried them and repressed them for so very long. That was very hard for me. So I had to do a lot of accepting it, a lot of writing and then putting it away and stepping away and trying to be present and then go back to it because it was like going down a rabbit hole every time in the writing. And then working with editors down the line helped me to see it in a different light, in that it was a story. At first it was just these recollections. So my book is told in first person narrative. It's a memoir. It reads like fiction. Sadly, it's not. It reads like fiction. There's a story there. There's twists and turns and surprises. And ultimately, in the end, I want the reader to walk away with not pity, not remorse, but some empathy and some understanding that I'm a survivor. It's a very sad story. It's really a coming of age story in that it's from about 4 years old until I'm 19. It's a snapshot. I'm in my 6th decade. So it's like a little sixth of my life. No, it's not the whole deal. So I want readers to walk away with that there is hope. And there's an epilogue that really talks about where I am now and that survivor piece to give the reader some hope and some understanding. And then I also put together a resource page at the back of the book because I wanted to provide some books that helped me and some resources that readers could go to. So there's some for sexual abuse survivors, and there's also some for ex-Scientology or survivors of cults.
Okay, it's so interesting. I love that it starts out and is sad because it is a sad story. But then, just as you did in your life in real time, you were able to paint a picture where things can get better and you can be in a place where you can now write a book. It is important, I think, when people sit down to do something that's difficult and they don't know what feelings are going to come up, you want to know that you have resources around you, that you have internal resources, you've learned some tools to help when the feelings come up and you need to figure out how to manage them. When you have the self-talk that you've been taught about how this isn't important to tell or you shouldn't be sharing the secrets, no one's going to believe you, or you're just complaining, or all the things. And I would love to hear about all the dialogue that you have to like bat out of the way. But I do think it is important to say that I think if you feel you have people around you who you might not need on a regular basis, but just knowing that they're there when you're doing something like this, it is important. I think it's hard to do something like this completely on your own. So I'm just wondering about that, your internal and external resources, but also how you handled all of the ways that you were taught to question or doubt yourself or think you were doing something wrong by telling these stories.
Well, you hit the nail on the head, Rachel. It's constant. It's just constant. In the beginning, I didn't tell anybody. I kept it a secret. I didn't even tell my husband I was writing. I didn't tell my family. I mean, one family member knew I was starting to write and gave me that book, but I didn't share any of it. I didn't share any of it probably until about 2 years ago when I first dipped my toe in the water and sent my story to Tony Ortega, who he's a great journalist and he covers Scientology and all its ins and outs. So that was the first step. After that was well received, that was shocking to me that 300 people had comments to say, "I'm so sorry that happened to you. What a great story. I'm so glad you shared that." Just their own connections with what I had survived and lived through in Scientology. That started it. And then I thought, okay, I'm still standing. The world did not collapse and crash just because I did that. But still, it was hard. It was hard to continue. The more I wrote, the more I realized how deep the story went and how much there was a connection to people in Scientology, even though my story is at the onset of Scientology because of my parents. They were with Hubbard in the late 50s. We were Scientologists through the 70s. It's a snapshot in the story of Scientology. Because it involved me and my family and my parents, and it was this coming of age story. And because of my parents passing early, they both died very young. They've been gone for 30, 40 years. I didn't have them to go back to and to talk to. So that part was hard, but I heard their voices still, those inner critics telling me, "Why are you writing about that? What's the point in this? Just move on. This is not something you need to share. You've lived this long without telling it. Why would you go there? Why bother?" So I heard that a lot in my head. It's a little quieter now. It's a little quieter, which is good. And then I think because of the dynamics with my mother, because I was sexually abused by my father, but I aligned with him. And so my mother was the enemy throughout most of my life. That started to shift right before she died. She died tragically of a brain aneurysm. And so she was here one day and gone the next. So that relationship never got to heal. I never got to that point. Part of it was through the writing of my book that I needed to come to terms with that and to heal in the best way that I could, to understand it and to have some empathy for her in what she survived and what she suffered through as a Scientologist and living with my father. So that has been helpful, but I still doubt it sometimes. I still think every once in a while, oh boy, mom were here. She wouldn't think this was a good idea. And then I turn it and I say, but maybe she would. Maybe she would if she had lived. Maybe we would have healed. Maybe would have gotten to that point where we could talk about it. We could both have grown and gotten to the place where it would have been okay for even her to have the story out there. That would be my hope. It has been hard. It has been hard to quiet that. Ex-Scientologists have helped because I reached out before the publication of the book to get some reviews. So I shared my story with them. One such person is Chris Shelton, who has the Speaking of Cults podcast, an ex-Scientologist and Sea Org member. And he was so appreciative of me sharing it and just so spot on with understanding what a harrowing experience I went through, but also how vulnerable I made myself to share that story. He's been so supportive with that. Claire Headley has been wonderful. I've reached out to her. And one of the things I did want to mention along with that is that I had to find purpose in it. In the beginning, it was just about healing and about getting my story out and making sense of this and how did Scientology affect me and my family and me in particular with the sexual abuse. What were the parallels? Because there's so many parallels between how you're groomed in a cult and how you're groomed with a sexual abuse predator. So, I need to make sense of that with the writing, and I touch on that in the book. But I reached out to Claire Headley because she is very involved in the Michael J. Render Aftermath Foundation that supports Scientologists who leave the Sea Org and to help them get situated in the world. They come out with skills, but skills aren't always transferable in the real world. Although they're very competent people, they have no housing. They might be disconnected from their families. And so I really wanted to have a purpose for my book. I've chosen to donate a portion of the proceeds to the Aftermath Foundation to help those. And that's because that could have been my story. That could have been my story. I didn't join the Sea Org when I was 16, but I was pretty strong-armed. And if it had not been for my mother saying she was going to call the police, she was so adamant at that point in her life because she was leaving Scientology and she had become so disillusioned. I think she saw my life flash before her eyes, and thankfully I didn't. Otherwise, my life would have been so different.
Oh my goodness. And I'm glad you mentioned Claire and Chris and Mike. And they are all friends and have also been on the podcast. So for people listening, those are going to be familiar names, which I'm very happy about. And it's lovely that you're using this as a way to help other people who are really needing very practical support in a way that I think people don't realize when they come out. It's very hard to attend to whatever trauma you've incurred if you don't have any food in a refrigerator or you don't even have a refrigerator. You have nowhere to live. It's a luxury to actually think about feeling better, getting better, because you just really need the practicalities of life to survive. And so it is quite incredible to have an organization that is aware of that and is trying to do its part and to help and does need that kind of support. So it's an interesting thing, too, to hear about the comparison about really being violated in different ways and being betrayed in different ways, but also in similar ways, and that they dovetail each other. What an interesting insight. So what can you tell us about that? I'm sure it was an aha moment also, but I'm really curious about that.
It definitely was an aha moment. That's a great way to put it, Rachel. So when I got to the end of my story, it was this coming of age story and got all my memories out and told the whole harrowing, sordid details of the story, I needed to have closure with it. And I needed to have closure just especially with my mother. That was really important to me. And with my father. So there's an epilogue at the end of the book. My dad died when I was 19. So the story ends with his death and me not knowing whether or not he was asking for forgiveness at the end of his life. That's kind of how it ends and leaves you hanging. So I thought, that's not really a good ending. But we need more here. But I can't write another 40 years of life. And so working with my editor, we decided on an epilogue. 19 years after my father died, my mother died.
Oh, wow. Oh, my goodness.
Right. It's just such a strange coincidence.
I got goosebumps.
Yeah. And I really had never looked at it that way. I knew how old I was, but I hadn't really put those two together, those numbers, like, oh, wow. So I write in the epilogue about my mother's death. So it was very sudden. She had a brain aneurysm. And so I tell the tale of going to the hospital and contacting my brother and coming to terms with taking her off life support and all of that. But then something happened after her death in that going through her things, I reached out to someone in her address book, which was a Scientologist. His name is Don Breeding. And Don Breeding was instrumental in the e-meter, not the creation of the e-meter, but the recreation of the e-meter. It was originally developed for L. Ron Hubbard in the 50s, and that was for Scientology auditing and processing. It's still used today in a much sleeker, newer, fancy form. But Don Breeding, when the contract ended with the original creators, Don Breeding took over. He was active in Scientology with my parents in the late 50s, part of the Hubbard Association of Scientologists. And he helped redesign it and had helped Hubbard to get Scientologists using it again. So it was an interesting little tidbit that I learned at the end of my mother's life in contacting him. The other piece that I learned is that she had reconnected with him because I didn't know why his name was even in her address book. And so when I contacted him, he shared how they had gone out to lunch a few times and they had gone to the LRH library that had just opened. So that was in the mid-90s. And they'd gone there, and looked at things, which was interesting to me in that I was shocked that she did that and still connected with Scientology because I really thought that she had put that behind her. I also learned that he had an old timers newsletter. So it was before the internet and before everything was still paper. Then you sent out a newsletter. And I shared with him my mom's story. And I shared with him some writing that my mother had done. She had written some poetry. And she had written some poetry about Scientology, one of them about Thetans. Thetans are Scientology's version kind of a soul. So I shared that with him. And he published all of that in this old timer newsletter.
Oh, wow.
Yeah. And so it kind of, to me, was a full circle in that they had been together at the very beginning of Scientology. And now at the end of her life, maybe that was her one small, contribution or way to close that door or close that circle and with someone that she had a connection with. So then I started to think about, okay, so all of that happened, but then what about me? How am I coming full circle? That's great. I ended that. I did my due diligence for my parents, being that compliant perfectionist person. That's how I was groomed, to be compliant, to do the right thing. What did that mean for me? And the aha moment was that Scientology and sexual abuse have some similarities. They're both secrets that you can't tell anybody because Scientology has so many secrets. They talk to you about that all the time. You don't say this to anybody else. This is only spoken here in an auditing session with other Scientologists. Everybody else who's not a Scientologist isn't going to understand their wogs, their derogatory term for regular people. And we just keep it inside. We just keep it here. Same thing with sexual abuse. We don't tell anybody else. These are our secrets. My father said those exact words to me. Mommy wouldn't understand.
Mommy wouldn't understand, just like people are told the rest of the world wouldn't understand, or they'll try to take it away from you.
And my father was protected by Scientology in so many ways. Not that his behaviors would have been condoned, but because of the secrecy of Scientology. So even if in auditing sessions he talked about it, spoke about it, any kind of perversion, abuse, anything that you share in those auditing sessions becomes the private property of Scientology to control you. Think about in our current state with Scientology, with the Masterson trial and all of those things. Who knows what Danny Masterson said in Scientology auditing sessions, but possibly sharing some of the things he was doing with women, and that was part of his, I don't want to say therapy, but part of his case, as they call it in Scientology. It's really helped my father to keep it secret because of Scientology. And then on the other side of that, my mother was condoned she had psychotic episodes. She did not wholeheartedly embrace Scientology in the way that my father did. I found writing of hers that's in my book in the 70s when she was really starting to question Scientology and was really trying to get out, but she was stuck. And she'd been trying in a sort of confessional that she wrote of her overts and withholds, that they call them in Scientology, that she had been trying to tell my father how bad Scientology was for years and to try to get him out, which was a revelation to me when I discovered that and in the writing of the book. So that was a very aha moment for me, in that they both suffered, but also had to keep those secrets. We all suffered, but they had to keep those secrets because of the nature of Scientology. And it was just not allowed to ever let that out. So that's why I said before, my hope would have been, had my mother lived, we would have gotten to that place where it was okay to let those secrets out.
Oh, it's so interesting. With the whole auditing process, because people there are not really clergy, even though this is called a church, and they're not therapists, they're not trained to really know how to respond. If someone brings something up, like if they're really having sort of a crushing emotional disability of some sort, they really need some sort of help, or if they've done something that they really shouldn't do, there's no one in there who is a mandated reporter. And there also isn't someone there who is trained to know really how to respond in a healthy way for the person, but also for the victims in the story. I remember one time working with a woman who, by the time I saw her, she was in her 30s, that she had been in Scientology since she was little, and she became an auditor at a young age and was hearing people's stories and didn't realize why she was feeling traumatized, because she said things didn't happen to her physically, even though there was neglect. She had 5 minutes to eat, rush, rush, rush. Like her whole life was, like an adrenaline rush. And that takes its toll. But she realized it was that she had to listen to so much information that was really disturbing to her, upsetting to her, where she thought someone should know this. Someone should be getting protected out there from what's happening. But she was barred from being able to do anything and say anything. And she just knew to put it in a file and put it away. And so I think there is this interesting exponential impact that some of these experiences have on those who listen to it and then don't quite know what to do or think they're doing something wrong by not following up and not protecting. So the whole system, I think, is really potentially dangerous for people involved in a lot of the different levels of it. But you're right, there is this code of secrecy, of silence, and that is potentially really not only harming, but endangering by not being able to protect those who really should be protected and not educating the people who are sharing these stories about why it's not right to do this. You're just collecting data, but it's a missed opportunity to tell your father, maybe you shouldn't be doing this with your daughter.
Exactly. That happened to me as an auditor, exactly what you mentioned. I've spoken about it before, but part of my trauma that I didn't even realize at the time, I was in an auditing session with someone who shared And it was basically an abusive situation with somebody else in the Scientology dorms. And so I was maybe 14, 15 at the time. I really was very naive in so many ways as a teenager, I realized. In some ways I was very insulated, even though I was exposed to so many adult things. I had repressed my sexual abuse from when I was younger, so it wasn't on the surface. It was there, but as we know with trauma, it was living in my body, it was there. So when this came out in the auditing session, it was very uncomfortable. I remember that. And the needle on the e-meter goes wacky when crazy things are said and interpolating thoughts, they call them. And so I knew just from my Scientology auditing training that this isn't good. Something bad is happening here, but I didn't know what. And so I wrote it all down, as you do, compliant. You do what you're told. You put it in the folder. You give it to the case supervisor. They read it. They tell you what to do next. You really don't have any autonomy, honestly, as an auditor. It's dictated by what the case supervisor says. Even though you're a trained auditor, and as you move up the levels, you might be a little more nuanced. But as a beginning auditor or just a general auditor, you're just the vehicle. You're just the vessel that's doing it and asking the questions. So when it came back, I was questioned. I was questioned about what the PC, the pre-clear, the person I was auditing said. Was this exactly what was said? As if I had done something wrong. And I remember being worried, oh no, what did I do wrong? The next thing that happened was they took him away from me. So I was no longer allowed to audit him. I don't remember seeing him anymore. I believe he left. It was at Celebrity Center. So I don't know what happened. But no one ever came back to me and said, thank you for writing that. As you said, like mandated reporters and, as an educator, that would be the next step. Thank you for protecting this person. I don't know what happened to the person that was being abused in the dorms. I know none of that. In the writing and getting that out, Rachel, that sat with me. It sat with me badly when I was 15. Now it sat with me even worse in that I realized the ramifications. I realized what I had heard and that I did nothing and that nothing happened. That guilt has been hard for me.
Let's talk about that because, and also when you say pre-clear, there are these terms are just so interesting and they're so sci-fi. It reminds me of did you see the movie Minority Report with Tom Cruise?
Exactly.
People are pre-cogs, I think they're called. And in Scientology, it's pre-clear. Oh, it was just too similar. There are people who I talk to, and I learned this term. I always want to give credit where it's due. I've learned so much about the work that I do from the people I do it with or for, and taking in their experience and understanding it on that level, which is so important. And this whole idea that's been talked about recently by a lot of my clients, which is this idea of moral injury, that you have had to participate in something that your conscience at some point gets impacted by because you have the sense that it was wrong. But when you're 15, you listen to the adults around you. I mean, same thing with a teacher in school who tells you about something or teaches you something and you need to write a paper on it with that particular bias or leaning, but you're thinking, this doesn't feel right to me, but you have to do it to get a good grade. There are a lot of times we forfeit what our conscience is guiding us to do that we would do differently if we really felt that we had a choice. But later on, we as adults, as thinking, feeling human beings, will start to have that feeling of real conflict. And it's hard. The ones who have been put through it are the ones who shoulder it. Then they're walking around having that moral injury or feeling guilt.
Yeah. Moral injury, I like that term. I've always referred to it as my moral compass. So I think because as an educator, that's something, and I was administrator in schools and working in higher education, that moral compass, that concept, I remember when I became a school leader, was just coming out in the world of education about how your moral compass leads you to do the right things and how you make sure that the right things happen for students and for families. It really resonated with me. And maybe because of my trauma, I had no idea at the time, but maybe because of that, in that I really had never thought about it in terms of that it's a moral obligation. That's something that I've really seen through the eyes of ex-Scientologists, in that in the telling of our stories, in the getting the messages out, in the educating the public about the abuses and the course of tactics and all the craziness that happens in cults, not just Scientology, but all of them, it's about that moral obligation that we all have to make sure that it doesn't happen to somebody else, that we try to protect them as best we can. And through education, you're protecting them, through outing the organizations and the cults and getting the messages out there, you're hopefully protecting someone that might be on the verge of going into Scientology or is dealing with something in some other cult or their own sexual abuse issues, whatever it is. But that really resonated with me. I've also really been appreciative of those ex-Scientologists that have gone about telling their stories not out of anger, not out of retribution, but out of that moral obligation. One of the first books that I read when I started doing my own writing was Janice Gillum Grady's The Commodore's Messenger. And she and I have such a strange story in that we were ships in the night, literally. I off-boarded the Royal Scotsman before she onboarded. Within about 6 months of each other, we made that connection when we finally were able to talk. And she's been such an anchor. I mean, it seems like a funny word because of the boat, but she really is such an anchor in that she's considering everything that happened to her, everything that she survived, being separated from her parents, being raised on the ship for years and years, and then on flag land bases, and then leaving Scientology and recreating her life. And then writing this book to make sure this history didn't go away and didn't get erased, because Scientology now would love to erase and has tried and is in the process of trying to erase anything that happened in those early years with Hubbard. And they glorify it and they lie about it and they create these beautiful orgs, and they've gone back and refurbished places where he lived and all of that. So she really was kind of a guiding light for me in that I wanted to do the same thing and tell that story of that period of time so that it didn't get forgotten.
Really honor it. I think it's so vital to be able to do that. There are a lot of people who are historians who wish people learned from history more than they do. I think that's why organizations like the Shoah Foundation, Steven Spielberg's Shoah Foundation, he makes sure to interview people who lived through the Holocaust or who know Holocaust stories from a lot of different perspectives, to have them documented, to have them matter, to have them be things that educate people, to have them be cautionary tales also. It is really important, I think, to have your story be used that way. So not only for your own clarity and healing, but for other people's too. And I'm wondering about some of the responses that you've gotten, and even some potentially of the harsh responses, and how to understand them. Because some people are really worried about even speaking on the podcast or any show, and what are they going to get in response? It feels important to understand how to understand that and where that is coming from. So what's been your experience?
I've thought about that a lot lately, because through the process of writing the book and embracing the world of social media, which I never did for about a year ago, that's been a whole education. I've put myself out there and put myself out there courageously, fearfully, and the responses have been fairly good, but that's with people I don't know. So it doesn't feel as impactful in that it's very different than telling a very good friend or telling someone that you've had a relationship with for several years and you've had this maybe work relationship and now you want to share something more personal. And so that's been a journey. I actually have a list that I started because I thought, okay, one at a time. So I started it with my daughters. And so that was kind of the beginning. The world didn't shatter and fall apart. They didn't hate me. So that was the start. Of course, my husband, although he's yet to read the book. Now that it's out, he's read it, but he was yet to read it in a way to protect him too, because I knew it would be so emotionally impactful for him because he loves me and he wouldn't want to know about all those harmful things. Same thing with my daughters. With friends, I do have a friend from many, many years. We went to junior high school together, two friends that have been my anchors throughout my life. And when I first started writing, I put it in a brown envelope and gave it to one of my friends. And I said, I don't know if this is crap, but I want you to read it. I just started. And I said, I really trust your perspective. I really trust you to tell me one way or the other, lightheartedly, even though it was pretty serious stuff because I was writing about the abuse. And that was in the beginning. And I didn't hear from her. I heard from her. We still went out and talked and everything, but she never said anything about it. And then I kind of thought, ooh, that inner critic, oh, that was the wrong choice. Shouldn't have done that. Shouldn't have shared it. Should have kept it a secret. All of those things went through my head. And then finally we went out one time, and maybe about a year and a half after I'd given it to her, I was brave enough and kind of had progressed a little bit further with the writing. And I said, did you ever read what I gave you? And she looked at me and she said, I did, but it was too hard for me to read. I didn't want to learn about that way. And it was such a response I didn't expect. I think I would have been better with if she said, yeah, you're a really good writer, or yeah, you really have a lot of work to do on that. If she'd said that, it would have been easier for me to accept. But that I didn't know what to do with. And my first reaction was to apologize, Rachel. But I didn't. I didn't because I had come so far as a sexual abuse survivor. And I had really done the work to realize it was not my fault. It was not my fault. There was nothing that I bore the blame with in that. It was something that happened to me. And that even if it was not easy for her to read about and she didn't want to know about it that way, I can't apologize for that. That's where she is. And so the conversation was really difficult. We finally turned it to, I just really wanted you to know this about me, and I want to be able to share this with you. I just really want you to still be my friend. When she said, what did you want from me? And I said, I just really want you to love me and to still be my friend. That helped. That helped to be able to say that. And I think it switched it a little bit for her, even as uncomfortable as it was, and that she didn't want to know about it. It turned the tide. And that helped us have more conversations about it. She's embraced it. She's embraced that I had the courage to tell the story, that was a part of my life, and that she's proud of me, that I wrote this book and that I've been able to share it. So you just never know. You never know. Not everybody's going to want to hear it in a positive light. Most people have, but I think part of that was it was too upsetting for her. It was too upsetting for her, and maybe her own traumas. I don't know if there's things that she hasn't shared with me, and there are things maybe she doesn't even know that are causing her to feel that way.
Yeah, that's really good insight to share, because sometimes people will misinterpret or overinterpret the responses that they get. Sometimes when you're not clear why someone has responded or not responded, I think we all kind of fill in the blanks with our worries, with the need to apologize, thinking we've done something wrong. And it could be that other people are just not in that space where they can take that in, or they're not ready for it, or they can't handle it in such a large dose, and they need to do it a little by little, or they need to know you're okay, so they might need to hear it from you. There are a lot of reasons, and so it is a really good reminder to not assume that you're doing something wrong, or that you've harmed another person or hurt it, or that someone doesn't care, or someone doesn't want to be in touch with you anymore. And it pays to ask. I do want to put a little of the onus on others listening who are the recipient of hearing people's stories or receiving people's stories to maybe put that into words. So they're not left guessing in the silence. And to say, this is actually a little hard for me. It's bringing up a lot for me. I think I need to do this in bite-sized pieces, like index cards. But just to be reassuring to the other person that it isn't that they've gone away or you've pushed them away. A good reminder in both directions.
Right. You can't control their reactions. That's what I had to learn too, especially when that happened. It's like, okay, that's not about me per se. It's more about her because we have such a strong relationship. We've known each other forever. I needed to have it be okay with her. And so I think that was the hardest part. And when it wasn't, that was very uncomfortable. That was very uncomfortable for a while until she was able to embrace it. Maybe that's what she needed, those bite-sized pieces, or to understand the bigger picture in reading the whole book and seeing the why.
Right.
So much harder to share with people you know than people you don't know. Because you just don't have that emotional connection with people that are reading your book that you don't know. You're hoping it makes a connection with them. You're hoping to create that connection, that they have empathy and that connects for them and helps them. But you don't have any control over that.
It's interesting. That's reminding me years ago when I was running this speakers bureau in New York, when I was working at what used to be the cult hotline and clinic. They had one there in New York. I was training people to go around and talk about their experiences who wanted to use this as an educational tool. And I remember people actually saying that they loved looking out and seeing faces they didn't recognize. It emboldened them to be able to talk more freely, which was interesting because you would think it would be the opposite, but it's often not. How interesting. Wow, that took me back. So I'm wondering also just if there's certain things from the story that you want to share with us, from the book that you want to share with us, but I also don't want to give away too much because I want people to buy it and I want to end by you letting us know where it can be found, etc. But before I think getting to that, going back to the self-talk, because it is something I notice a lot of people experience, even in the support group or in a session. There are these moments, there's periods of silence, and some people might misinterpret that as someone dissociating, even though that can happen when you're talking about things that are difficult. But it almost feels like they're scrolling through all of the self-talk they've learned to doubt their experience, to make it seem like they shouldn't be complaining, to worry about who they're telling it to, all the things. And so they have to kind of fight against that. And there's this time delay before they talk. So are there things that you developed, words you developed, phrases where you could stand in your own shoes and feel okay about what you were doing?
Yes. I would say some strategies worked better than others, depending on how far down the rabbit hole I was when I was doing the writing. My mantra became, and I wrote it down on a Post-it and I had it while my writing the whole time, was find a way forward. So simple. And I don't know where I read it. I know I didn't write it. I didn't create it, but I read it somewhere. It helped me in that I just needed to keep moving forward. So for each step, that's the purpose, to just find that way forward. I didn't know what that was going to end with. I didn't know where that was going to take me, but I knew I didn't want to stay stuck in where I was, because I was stuck in this place of all of these memories and all of these experiences flooding my head and trying to get them out on paper and trying to make sense of them. And I couldn't shut the door. They weren't letting me shut the door. They were jamming the door open and there was no shutting the door. So I had to just keep moving forward. So I had to find a way forward. That helped me. The other thing that I said to myself in some form was, it wasn't your fault. It wasn't your fault. And so many things that happened were not my fault. That one took me a little bit longer. That definitely took me a little bit longer because I did feel guilt, like the story I shared when I was involved with Scientology auditing, when I was a teenager. But as a younger child, so much of that, it wasn't my fault. There was nothing that I could have done to change the trajectory there. And I would say also through getting it out there with social media, and as uncomfortable, and I can't tell you how uncomfortable it is for me, But as uncomfortable as it's been to hear me talk about it and to see myself on that, I realized that that's the way that people communicate, and that that was a way for me to affirm myself, to affirm that, yes, I did this. Yes, the world can see it. I don't have to hide it anymore. I can let that secret out. Like you said, it's much easier to have it come out to people you don't know and that you may never meet, in that, even though it feels unreal, because social media doesn't feel real, but so many people are looking at it. So that has helped me a lot too, to know that I can be affirmed that way. But the negative thoughts still do come. They really do come. And even with the making of the book and the editing and the layout work and working with the publishers and getting it all done, at every step, I would think to myself, oh, it's not going to happen. I did all this work. It's not going to happen. It's not going to get there. I can't make it all happen. It's out of my control. And all those negative self-talk things that we say to ourselves. My husband has been a great support, Rachel, in that he doesn't understand all of it, but he's a good cheerleader. So every step he would say, all right, so he's like a checklist guy. Okay, good. You can check that off your list. Like, that's done. It's helped some. At least it lightens it a little bit, and I can look at it more abstractly that way and say, okay, it is tasks to get done. But it's a process. And then it's the people reading it and the feedback that you get from that. So I think that's my next stage now is I want to hear from readers. I want to hear how it resonated. I have a website, and contact me through social media. And I want to know, how is it helping? How are they connecting to the story? And that is important to me. That's really important to me. And I think that that will take me to whatever that next healing step is. I don't know what it is. Part of me wants to say, okay, that's done, and we close the door. But I think once the door opens, it never closes. Really doesn't. You just keep walking. You just keep walking through the next door and the next door and the next door. And you realize that it's not about shutting it away, avoiding it, keeping it secret. I mean, the whole AA mantra, you're as sick as your secrets. I mean, it's so true. I feel empowered and I feel so much more authentic in my life, if that makes any sense, because I've been able to get this out. I can really be me now with all the cuts and bruises and terrible things that I endured. I can be me and I can embrace all the good and the bad.
That's such an important part of this story. No, it's like an epilogue to the epilogue, that here you keep moving forward, and that's okay. You can carry with you so much of what you've been through. And I think that's an important reminder for people, just as they are raising their own children, etc., to be careful that you don't have to be perfect, but you do want to be careful, because this is something that can be carried through a lifetime. But it is also really important to see that a good life is possible even though. And the even though part is something that you personify by coming to this place of being able to write about your experience and be able to have a good life, a joyful life, a relationship that's supportive, feeling deserving of that, which is not an easy sell for people coming out of these experiences. So there's a lot that the scarring does create, and it can limit people in their lives, and it's hard to have and receive good things at times. But it sounds like you have really developed a life that is much more in line with you. And if you had had the choice when you were younger to live a certain life, I think it would have looked much more like the one you have now, which is a lovely thing to be able to say, and a lovely thing that you've created and that you've kind of let in, which is also not easy when you're not potentially feeling deserving. I'm wondering about if there's a certain part of the story that you want to let people know about, to really have some insight into why you chose that, or kind of recurring themes, or something that you really learned that would be good for people to hear from the author.
There's so many parts of it that people might connect with. I know what I connect with and what I think is most important, but that might be different for different readers. I think one of the more powerful pieces is at the beginning, what I tried to do, because like I said, it's a memoir and it's told though as a fictional story. You read it, it feels like fiction because there's dialogue, there's all the drama and interactions that happen in families. And so it's this whole family story. But at the very beginning, I set the stage for just me, my parents, and Scientology, because that's really what it was. My parents had just left Washington, D.C. I was just a couple of years old, made their way out to Colorado because L. Ron Hubbard had gone over to St. Hill Manor in England, tax evasion. He left the U.S., created his new world over there. They didn't follow him there. People were building franchises. So Scientology at that time, you could go out and you could disseminate Scientology through a smaller franchise. You were still beholding to L. Ron Hubbard and financially and to follow his technology, and kind of went south because people started doing their own things. And then he had to reel that back in. But at the time, that was what was happening. My parents left and it was just us. We moved to Colorado, and how life started again for us. But it started under the shadow. It started under the shadow of Scientology. And that shadow throughout the book sometimes is just, you go outside and it's a little foggy and cloudy. So there's just a little small shadow. And then you go outside and the sun is shining and there's this huge shadow. I think that's something that you'll see throughout the book of how that shadow came and went, and how my father's perception of himself, I think he was narcissistic. I think both of my parents had a little bit of that. I think my father probably more than my mom, maybe. I don't know. But also he was such a true believer. He believed everything that L. Ron Hubbard said. He was one of the first clears back in Washington, D.C. He wore his clear bracelet proudly. And at the very beginning of the book, I set the stage for that, for you to really understand how he embraced Scientology and how even at the very beginning of them leaving, he really would have wanted to have followed L. Ron Hubbard, but my mother didn't. And I think that's the whole dichotomy of the story, is how that push and pull happened throughout my life, and how my mother, in some ways, had to acquiesce to him because of the generation. It was the 60s. She didn't have a job. She didn't have any wherewithal to make her own choices. And so she was at the mercy of not only doing what my father wanted, but also doing what the cult wanted her to do. I think that would be interesting to the reader. I hope that that is interesting for them to see how that dichotomy happened and how that push and pull happened throughout and then began to unravel by the end of the story, and all of the damage that happened along the way, financially, emotionally, how dysfunction impacted our family. And that could be anything. You could take Scientology out and put in any other cult, religion, any other type of dysfunction. So I think that story will resonate with people from all walks of life, because it's a story that sadly many people might have lived. And I think that's helped me understand also that everybody has a story. Everybody has a story that you meet. And sometimes they share it, sometimes they don't, but everybody has one. And everybody has scars. Sometimes you see them. Sometimes they're outward scars. If you've had an accident or you've had some kind of birth defect, something that's very visible, a disability. But most people's scars are very hidden.
They are. Also a good reminder. People will sometimes say, just be nice, because you never know. Just because. Why not? Because someone could be smiling, but inside they're really not. And they've had a really hard day or a really hard life, or you might be the first person who was nice to them that day, whatever else. A lot of people are struggling with a lot of things. But you're right. To generalize the message about a dichotomy is smart, because people will sometimes say, well, I don't know if I can relate to this story because I wasn't raised in Scientology. Oh, yeah, you can relate to this story on so many levels. When people see their own life and things, it really actually helps to normalize also what you went through to a certain degree, that these were really human experiences, even though the details, the specifics might be different because they're more about Scientology. But Yes, parents are often at odds with each other about things, feeling different ways about things, happy that they're living somewhere. Another place would be a happier place to live for the partner, but they suffer through living there, wherever there is. Same thing with child rearing. They're going to have different ideas about that, about being punitive or not, or raising your voice or not, or whatever else. And so how do you come to an understanding and have it not create discord in the household when it very often does, but with the added pressure, the pressure cooker that Scientology is? I don't know how people just deal with any other tension that they have on any other subject, because I'm sure it overshadows so much. It has to be first thing on your mind, keeping your stats up or whatever, all the pressure. I'm sure it's very hard.
Yeah. So hopefully that resonates with readers. That's one of my wishes there, that they can make those connections and, like you said, see a bit of maybe themselves, or give them the perspective to understand that that could be happening to people they know, to other families, to people that they come across. And like you said, just be kind. Just try to be kind and have a little patience and empathy with people.
Right. And I think also the message that comes through, without it being something that you wrote about, but still the message can come through that even though you can be put through a lot, it doesn't change you. You still have your nature. You still have your moral compass. You still have your sense of things and your own personality and all of it that I'm sure comes through in the writing. And still, even if you feel that you've been treated a certain way, you're still going to care about how you portray people and how you're going to have them come across, because that's your conscience-led way of looking at things.
And anytime you read a coming of age story, I think you can connect. I know I can. Whenever I read books like that, one of the other people that's been so great I want to mention in the ex-Scientology community is Catherine Spallino, and she wrote the story The Bad Cadet. She was a second-generation Scientologist as well, a little younger than I am. So she was a cadet, which is like a young Scientologist, their young Scientology school during the 80s. And so her story is, again, a great one in that it documents that period of time, tells that history. She wrote it as a coming of age story also. And she also has read my book and written a great review. And I think that helped me really understand also from her perspective, and also Janice Gillum Grady, who wrote her book about the Commodore's Messenger, because she grew up in Scientology. It affects children differently, but similarly. The thread that goes throughout is the dysfunctional piece and the choices that parents made because of the cult. Janice's mother allowed her to be separated from her because she had no choice. So when I say allowed, she really wasn't allowed. That happened, and she really had no choice to not see her children. That was dictated by L. Ron Hubbard. Catherine's story, very similar. Her parents were in the Sea Org. She saw them so infrequently. That was what you did. Your children went off and you didn't even know what was going on with them. You trusted it because it was Scientology, and you were too busy, like you said, keeping your stats up and doing the grueling work that you had to do as a Scientologist. And in my story, because my parents were public Scientologists and we were public, we weren't members of the Sea Org, we experienced it in the same way, in that my parents made choices based on what Scientology was dictating. And they made bad choices. They made choices that were not in the best interest of raising children, as hard as my mother tried, not in the best interest of financially what would be best for a family. I mean, we lost our home. It was foreclosed upon because of all the money that they spent on Scientology, and we could have easily plunged into poverty.
Yeah, cultic groups and also fundamentalist branches of religions. There are a lot of people who were raised, who were children in organizations that didn't know about children and that didn't really know about letting them be children and letting them make mistakes and letting their brain develop and be accepting of the fact that they're going to forget things and they're going to get distracted and they're going to spill things and they're going to whatever else. And that should be okay, but it's just not within these situations. So you learn to be very stressed at a young age and to hold yourself up to a certain standard at a young age. And then it's hard to just learn to relax and be and play and laugh and giggle and do your thing just for the sake of doing your thing. So it is so good to speak with you again. It's always a treat to talk to you. And where can people find your book and social media, as uncomfortable as you are with it?
I know, right?
But go for it. Tell people where.
Well, the title of the book is Clearly Lies Are True. So everything has that title on it. So you can go on Amazon and just look up Clearly Lies Are True. It's a paperback, it's an ebook, and it's an Audible in my own voice. So they can find that and read it any which way. My handle, or whatever they call it on social media, is at Clearly Lies Are True. And that's also my website, clearlyliesartrue.com. So it's all there. And if you go onto Instagram, you can do the link tree thing and it takes you everywhere. It's magic. So thank goodness for people who know how to do all of that.
Right.
I have someone that helps me.
Absolutely. And I love the title of the book. Actually, it's really, really great. Pam, thank you, thank you, thank you. Really, you're such a wonderful resource. And just your presence is so reassuring about what can happen in the life that you can have. And I'm glad actually that your book is read in your own voice. I was actually hoping that that's true because I haven't heard the Audible version, but you have that kind of voice that helps people, I think, to really be receptive to your story and really know this is something to be believed. This is something to be taken seriously. Thank you again for your time today.
Oh, thank you, Rachel. It's always a pleasure to speak with you. And I just love the work that you do. And I appreciate this platform. So thanks again.
One more thing before you go. Thank you so much, really so much, to Pamela for all that she shared with us. It is a very kind of intimate look at something very real, a lot of things that are very real, very troubling. Oh my goodness, there's so much to unpack here. There's this word that just kept coming up in my mind, and I know briefly in our discussion, that was the word betrayal. When you're dealing with being lied to in a cult, when you're dealing with having been in a cult and not realizing or not being told it was a cult, and then being abused, being mistreated in that way, whether or not it felt that way, still it's not something a parent should be doing with a child. It is really a betrayal of trust. So many people talk about feeling betrayed, not only by things that happened within their cultic group, but the fact that they were maybe born and raised in something that they already felt betrayed, that didn't get to choose the life that they had that turned out to be so difficult, that made them feel so different from the rest of the world. And so it is a very difficult thing to deal with, to feel betrayed. Betrayal is different. It is different than anger. Betrayal is different than resentment, even though both of those are very valid emotions and strong emotions. There's something about betrayal that is about having your trust and feeling of safety shattered. And when you have your trust and feeling of safety shattered, you then are in this mode of really knowing that someone who you should have been able to feel safe with wasn't able to really give you that, wasn't able to return that. And so it can break your foundation. It can break this feeling of having trust in the world. Sometimes it can be generalized, so people just don't know if the next person they trust can be trusted because the betrayal feels so awful. It makes people feel so raw. It also can leave people with wounds that are connected to their self-worth. Like, if I mattered enough, they wouldn't have done this to me. Or if I was special enough, or if I was important enough, or if I was whatever, fill in the blank, then they would have known not to do this, or they would have remembered not to do this. And that is an equation that doesn't usually fit, or doesn't actually at all fit in these situations, because it's not about you. It's not about your value and if you matter enough and if you're significant enough or special enough. and worthy of being protected, worthy of being told the truth, because everyone is worthy, as far as I know, unless you're a very troubled person or a sociopath. You're worthy of being respected, and you're worthy of being given the truth, especially children. It's also a violation of attachment bonds. So there can be a lifelong, at times, struggle with attachment. And what does it mean to attach to someone? What does it mean to give over your trust, your feelings, your love to someone who is close, someone who should, again, be able to be trusted? You can fear abandonment. You can fear rejection. You can have a lot of fears about what feels good and safe suddenly no longer feeling good and safe. And this assumption that it's bound to happen, that you're going to be betrayed. And so there are a lot of people who avoid getting attached or are very not only avoidant in their attachment style, but anxious in their attachment style. Like, at what point soon is the other shoe going to drop? At what point soon am I going to be hurt? Or is it going to be revealed that I'm being lied to, or the person who I am trusting here shouldn't be trusted and doesn't deserve that? There can also be this shock in your system, and I think the shock comes from this cognitive dissonance. This doesn't fit. This doesn't fit. This kind of behavior doesn't fit what I am supposed to be able to feel here with this person or in this environment, or in what's supposed to be a spiritual or a holy environment. I know that when you deal with cognitive dissonance, then you're dealing with this feeling of being deeply disoriented and deeply pained. And then there's the loss. There's the loss of trust, but also the loss of that relationship, the loss of innocence, the loss of being able to idealize something or someone, the loss of a feeling of security, and sometimes the loss of future dreams that you had for yourself in that organization or with that person. There's so much to it. It is so unfair that people have to go through so much of this in these environments. And with certain people, it does become conflicted and more confusing when it's a parent figure, to be sure. When there is this rupture of trust, it is very hard to get it back. And once someone has violated it, it is very hard to get it back and sometimes impossible to get it back. And sometimes that's not a bad thing, because they might not have been the right people to give your trust to now that you have more information. What is also true is that sometimes when you're dealing with anger, resentment, and betrayal, they do overlap. But I still see them as distinct and worthy of their own attention and respect. And I point this out because sometimes people are looking for the words. They're looking for the words to use to describe how they feel. And sometimes a friend or a therapist will say, "Oh, you feel angry?" Yeah, and, or, it's close. And so I do this for people who might not have the language of emotion, but also people raised in environments where they couldn't have their emotions and they weren't taught to be able to address emotions. So it could still be foreign territory to them. So I see anger in terms of it being kind of an acute flare, like a fiery kind of flare. Resentment to me feels like consistent or constant burn. And then betrayal is a deep wound, and it alters trust and attachment. So they are the same and they are different and distinct and worthy of talking about and learning about and finding out that there is also a reason for them, and you're not wrong for having them. You are honoring what happened to you and finding the right way, the right words to describe it so that people understand. Take good care, and I'll talk to you next week.
Thank you very much for listening. Please support Indoctrination on Patreon at patreon.com/indoctrination. Be sure to give us a follow on our social media. Find us on Facebook and Instagram using Indoctrination Podcast. And for Twitter, find us at @_indoctrination. We love hearing from you too. So send us an email at indoctrinationshow@gmail.com. And for more updates on the show, visit our website at www.podpage.com/indoctrination.